Okay, so if you're new to my channel, you don't know any of this. If you're familiar with my channel, you're familiar with it. This guy here, Genxennial, or Genxennial, or however you say his name, Genxennial. I don't know. I always call him Genxennial. But anyway, he's an ISTP. I've always thought he was an ISTP. He introduced himself as one. I don't know if I don't think I ever typed him or anything, but maybe I did. I don't remember. Um, I've always operated under the assumption that he's an ISTP. Well, the other day, Horse Mumbler comes around and says that he's not an ISTP, he's an ESFP, that he's TI polar. Well, I would be shockingly and starkly wrong in my assumptions heretofore if that were the case, and he would be shockingly, in my opinion, contraindicative of what I typically see from ESFPs in the chat. So he asked me to watch this video of his and see what I think. So I'm going to do that, and hopefully I won't get copyrighted.
If there's one thing the 16 types community goes overboard on, it's the stereotypes and labels. The very first piece of information we get after finishing a self-assessment test is a label.
I'm a free human being with an independent will.
Sure, the function stacks are indicative of general preference, but there comes a point when people talk about it like,
it is your destiny.
I'm an ISTP, otherwise known as a mechanic, a craftsman, or a virtuoso. Hey, you must really like working on cars. Har har har. No, I don't like working on cars. I can work on cars. I can build a shed, but that doesn't mean I want to or I like to. That's because ISTPs are notoriously lazy, lol. One person's lazy is another person's priority preference. As an example, my priorities supersede your preference. Asshole. Touche.
That's how long it is? That's it? It's only 55 seconds? Wow. But that's not the one he wanted me to watch. There's no fucking way that guy is an ESFP. No fucking way.
Welcome aboard. I'm your Genxennial host, Brian. And before we get to the laughs, the scoffs, and the triggerings, I'd like to get something serious out of the way first. Transgender women of color suffer at the hand of violence and hate more than almost any demographic in this country. 2020 was the deadliest year since 2013. Please see the links in the description below for additional resources on their movement and rights. Also, I'll be monitoring the comment section closely this time.
Okay, so right off the bat, let me tell you that this is great that it's this kind of video because it's going to make it abundantly clear, I think, that like there are some stereotypes such as ESFPs are all like open and accepting towards everything. You know, what's important is that we love whoever we want, whenever we want, however we want, and all that kind of stuff. So what I love about him asking me to watch this video is right off the bat, if depending on your political persuasion and your thoughts about these sort of things, you may conclude that his political position is more consistent with that of an ESFP than an ISTP. If you don't think about politics well or whatever, you may just conclude that right off the bat. Or if you're just not, it's not that you're not thinking about well, but you're just using a quick heuristic, you might conclude something like that. Let's see how he argues it. That's what's going to be determinant in whether or not he's arguing it from an emotional perspective or a thinking perspective. So let's find out.
I'm not the government, so you can take your free speech argument and shove it up your ass.
That's an excellent.
Thumbs up if you like it, thumbs down if you're triggered already. Otherwise, hit subscribe and I'll try harder next time. Okay, let's go. Today I'm making the steering wheel in oncoming traffic. We're talking about transgender American politics.
Okay, so this can fairly be critiqued and probably should, that none of these things are relevant to any critique on Rand Paul. He's a U.S. Senator, yes, an eye doctor, okay. This, whatever live in his father's shadow, is FE shitting on him, and being a shitty neighbor is an FI argument, basically. This stuff, Harvard, Tulane, Mount Sinai, Penn State, State of Penn, Physician General, State of Penn, Secretary of Health. These things may be relevant if you're looking at specific medical claims where they're making contradictory medical arguments. So if that's the case, then these are somewhat relevant, and this is somewhat relevant. This, though, is somewhat, making any person who's checking to make sure you've thought things well go like, okay, you're clearly pushing an agenda here, right? So even if you are, and the title is obviously clearly pushing an agenda as well. Even if you are, though, the smartest way to push it is the least agendaist. So anyway, let's proceed.
Genital mutilation.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
Has been nearly universally condemned. Genital mutilation has been condemned by the WHO, the United Nations Children's Fund, the United Nations Population Fund. According to the WHO, genital mutilation is recognized internationally as a violation of human rights.
Okay, so before he responds, let me tell you what the proper response to this is. Genital mutilation is non-consensual violation of bodily integrity. So it's irrelevant to the question of transgenderism. Let's see what Genxennial says. Genxennial.
Talking about circumcision, according to the WHO, male circumcision is medically indicated for only a few conditions, and that routine neonatal circumcision is not currently recommended on medical grounds. Let's see if I'm right.
Genital mutilation is considered particularly egregious because, as the WHO notes, it is nearly always carried out on minors and is a violation of the rights of children.
Rand Paul is correct there, okay? And yes, you could argue that circumcision is technically a form of genital mutilation based on some definition, but the fact is, what comprises genital mutilation is the concretization of sexual violence against women, really. So it's like, I'm going to deny you a physical access point to your sexual being that is naturally yours. Now, you might say the same thing is true of males, and that's fine and dandy, but I never heard really any adult males complain that they wish their penis were more sensitive because they're circumcised or something like that. It's a category error to compare the two things, frankly. You may very well argue that circumcision is not a great thing to do. You may very well argue that we oughtn't do it, that it's comparably barbaric in its justifications or lack thereof. But you could not even begin to say that they're comparable in terms of harm. So in that regard, this does not comprise a good argument. However, it does comprise a TI style critique against Rand Paul, assuming that Rand Paul does embrace circumcision. We don't know. If Rand Paul himself agrees that circumcision comprises genital mutilation, then he's not even an adequate TI critique of Rand Paul. So let's continue.
Genital mutilation is not typically performed by force, but as WHO notes that by social convention, social norm, the social pressure to conform, to do what others do and have been doing, as well as the need to be accepted socially and the fear of being rejected by the community, American culture is now normalizing the idea that minors can be given hormones to prevent their biological development of their secondary sexual characteristics.
Okay, well, so, again, here Rand Paul is conflating two things dramatically, which is to say, communitarian expressions of coercion that don't include actual physical force are nevertheless coercive. Nobody is being coerced into becoming a transgendered person. And normalizing that it's acceptable is light years away from coercion. So Rand Paul is doing some sophistry here without a doubt. Keep in mind, I'm just critiquing the argumentation here.
American culture is normalizing it. At last check, Brazil lowered the age at which young people can access gender reassignment surgery from 21 to 18. They dropped the age requirement for hormone therapy from 18 to 16. Although those under 18 must have consent of parent or guardian. Elsaro, anyone? American culture. Okay.
Dr. Levine, you have supported both allowing minors to be given hormone.
Okay, again, I think that's consistent with an ISTP. So he's making a TI correction. Rand Paul says American culture is normalizing it. His critique is it's not American culture that's normalizing it. That's the speech. That's a wrong claim of you, Rand Paul. It's Brazil who normalizes it more than America, for example. So it's silly for you to pick out America. Well, that's a silly argument to make, of course, right? The fact is, the key point to be distinguished between is that normalization does not equal a form of coercion, and it is not the case that normalization even equals encouragement. So, in other words, we are so very, very, very far away from individuals who wish to be their existing gender and express as such and are being pressured into being some other gender. It's absolutely absurd to compare some sort of communitarian practice that's rooted in an ideology that assumes both the sacred and the secular, called Islam, and is born of the evils of that phenomenon, subsuming those two things. Without the separation of the secular and sacred, those sort of evils will inevitably occur because it's an interpretive matter as to how you're going to read the magical thinking frame, and whose interpretation is predominant. It's always going to be equal to who has the most power. And it's not because of the right kind of... There's no meritocracy there, in other words. But, so it's like there's nothing remotely close in terms of the actual warrants between somebody who in America chooses to get a gender reassignment surgery and somebody in Islamic Africa who fundamentally is coerced into a young woman or young girl is coerced into a kind of surgery that does dramatic harm to her, right? To say that based on those WHO definitions or something, that we can conclude that gender reassignment surgery comprises genital mutilation is a complete nonsense. So the thing is, the only argument that one might make about it is that it's an issue of body dysmorphia. If you are going to make that argument, then you better also be opposed to circumcision, breast augmentation surgery, nose jobs, and every other bit of cosmetic surgery that exists. Because there's no categorical difference between the kind of cutting and changing your body that's done in those cosmetic surgeries than is done in the gender reassignment surgery. So the key point being consenting adults. I would say a strong argument that ought to be considered is whether society's interests are served by allowing people to make life-changing decisions before their frontal lobe has fully developed. So I would argue that there's good reason to push back sort of the age of the majority in general because of what we've learned with science about the developmental period for human beings, especially males. You're not really fully grown until you're 24, 25 years old. So that's a good argument for delaying age of majority in general that would work as an argument against things like lowering the age for consent on this. It is a big life-changing decision, right? So it is the case that people shouldn't take it lightly. It is the case that we should make sure that the people who choose to do it are actually expressing their own will. Even, when you have people who choose to do this, even though they're getting plenty of pushback from people, as almost every single individual who does this, I'm sure, does get plenty of pushback from at least some people around them. To the extent that it's normalized, in other words, people are saying we should be nice to these people and treat them as human beings first and foremost rather than pathologizing them. Well, that's correct. So, anyway, let's see what he says.
blockers to prevent them from going through puberty, as well as surgical destruction of a minor's genitalia.
Can you repeat the part of the stuff where you say all about the things?
As well as surgical destruction of a minor's genitalia. Like surgical mutilation, hormonal interruption of puberty can permanently alter and prevent secondary sexual characteristics. The American College of Pediatricians reports that 80 to 95% of prepubertal children with gender dysphoria will experience resolution by late adolescence if not exposed to medical intervention and social affirmation.
Don't ask any other questions.
Dr. Levine, do you believe that minors are capable of making such a life-changing decision as changing one's sex?
It's a bold strategy, Con. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Well, Senator, thank you for your interest in this question. Transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field with robust research and standards of care that have been developed. And if I am fortunate enough to be...
The correct answer is no, by the way. You should not believe that minors are capable of making a life-changing decision such as that. I am absolutely opposed to the idea that minors should have autonomy regarding their what do they call it? Not optional surgery, but elective surgeries. Should minors have autonomy over elective surgery for themselves? No. That's a general rule. The answer to this woman should have said is absolutely not. If they're too young to have sex, they're too young to change their sex. And that's a simple fact of the matter.
confirmed as the Assistant Secretary of Health. I look forward to working with you and your office and coming to your office and discussing the particulars of the standards of care for transgenderism.
The specific question was about minors. Let's be a little more specific since you evaded the question. Do you support the government intervening to override the parent's consent to give a child puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and/or amputation surgery of breast and genitalia? You have said that you're willing to accelerate the protocols.
Okay, so note what Rand Paul did there is he hid the actual warrant. Now he's absolutely right to critique that horrible woman's non-answer. Absolutely right. A horrible woman's non-answer is shit and should be flushed down the toilet. But what Rand Paul does is much more insidious because he's smart and he knows better. And so he hid the warrant. And he tried to conflate the fact that overriding the parent's consent is the key thing here. Should the government override the parent's consent? That's a very different question than the one he originally asked, right? The one he originally asked was, do you think that children have an independent ability to make this life-changing decision? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Now, if parent consent is involved, it's no longer an autonomous decision. So fuck you, Rand Paul, for being slippery like that. You know that sophistry isn't going to fly. Not with air hostess Eric around anyway.
For street kids, I'm alarmed that poor kids with no parents who are homeless and distraught, you would just go through this and allow that to happen to a minor.
He's placing the balls on a tee. Batter up.
I would hope that you would have compassion for Kira Bell, who's a 23-year-old girl who was confused with her identity. At 14, she, as a lot of teenagers do, try hormones that will affect them for the rest of their life.
So which is it, Rand? Amputations or hormones? Take your pick.
Will you make a more firm decision on whether or not minors should be involved in these decisions?
Yeah.
The question is a very specific one. Should minors be making these momentous decisions?
For the last time, we don't let minors make decisions.
For most of the history of medicine, we wouldn't let you have a cut sewn up in the ER, but you're willing to let...
Okay, so, I mean, I agree with Genxennial. I'm going to stop watching this video now. First of all, Genxennial is not a fucking ESFP. I don't know what the horse mumble is thinking. It's just insane. I mean, seriously, it's like... I understand... Okay, here's what horse mumbler is thinking. That he's identified warrants that are inadequate. He's identified a habit of not successfully choosing the best argument and stuff, right? Well, he's conflating NE and TI. It's true that Genxennial, I'm still calling you Genxennial when you're hanging around my channel. When I'm referring to your channel, I really should call you Genxennial. Anyway, I agree he's not choosing the best arguments. But all the arguments he's choosing are TI arguments. He's pointing out inconsistencies. He's contradicting them. The only one that wasn't really is his trying to portray Rand Paul as a big dummy and that lady is very smart. The thing is, Rand Paul, in one breath, correctly condemns that woman for evading his question, and in the next breath, pretends she answered it in the affirmative or negative or whatever, right? And then proceeds to argue against the answer he wanted her to give in the most bullshitty kind of possible way imaginable. So is Rand Paul a scummy sophist? Yeah. Is that lady a moron? Yeah. Is Genxennial an ESFP? No fucking way. Is Genxennial gonna win all these arguments? Also, no, but that's lack of NE, not lack of TI.